Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into one of the most aggressively well-intentioned environments in all of Victorian England, the nursery, a room designed with love, decorated with arsenic, and managed by a woman who has not smiled since 1874. Not a dungeon, not a workhouse, a cheerfully wallpapered room where the curtains were slowly poisoning everyone, and the medicine cabinet was somehow worse. If one of you suggested this topic, thank you, genuinely. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of warmly horrifying bedtime content. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Now get comfortable. Lights off, blanket up to your chin, fan on low, because tonight the nursery is fully staffed and running on schedule. Have you ever wondered what a Victorian nursery actually smelled like? How many layers a child was expected to wear before breakfast? What happens when the medicine your mother gives you contains opiates and the dosage is more of a general suggestion? Did the wallpaper watch you while you slept? Were the toy behind glass because they were precious, or because something had gone wrong the last time a child touched one? Could you reach the rocking horse? Would you want to, given that it has one eye and has clearly seen things? Congratulations! You have just woken up in a Victorian nursery, London, 1887. There is a wire cage attached to the window. You are very small. A pigeon is looking at you with more concern than your doctor. Good luck. You do not decide when you wake up. That decision was made before you were born, formalised into a schedule kept on a small card in Nanny's apron pocket, and it has not been revisited since. The hour is early. The light coming through the curtains is the grey beige of a morning that has not yet committed to being a morning. You lie still for approximately 1 second before the door opens, and with it comes Nanny, in full uniform, already equipped with the day's agenda. She does not ask how you slept. That information is not part of her schedule. Nanny is the governing body of this room. She has her own hierarchy, her own set of regulations, and her own private opinions about everything, none of which she shares, because sharing opinions is not in the schedule either. She arrived with the household the way the furniture arrived, purposefully, efficiently, and with the implicit understanding that she will outlast everyone. The nursery runs on her time. You simply happen to be in it. Let's talk about getting up. This is not a casual process. You are lifted, assessed, turned approximately 45 degrees, and assessed again. Your temperature is noted. Your colour is noted. The status of your digestion is a matter of household record. It is like being a very small and recently acquired piece of property that requires daily inspection to confirm it has not depreciated overnight. You are then dressed, which takes longer than you would expect, and involves more layers than the season strictly requires. Now, the layers. There is an undershirt. There is something over the undershirt. There is something over that, which requires buttons. There are stockings. There are garters for the stockings. Initialudi vorshri psaldavar soher, wanjuald. There is a pinafore if you are a girl, or a small dress if you are a boy under the age of 5, because breeches come later and must be earned, apparently, through the passage of time and good behaviour. The entire operation takes the better part of 20 minutes. You are not consulted on any of it. Of course, the room itself is doing its part. The curtains are heavy and green-tinted, which is the fashionable choice, and also the choice that happens to contain a quantity of arsenic in the dye. They catch the morning light pleasantly. The cord rattles as Nanny draws them back. The wallpaper is a companion piece, pastoral, cheerful, faintly poisonous. The family cat has not entered this room in 4 years, and will not be explaining why. Meanwhile, the rocking horse in the corner stands at an angle, watching. It is missing one eye, and has 3 functional legs. It has seen every morning in this room for a decade. It has no notes to add. Breakfast is coming, which means something is coming. What is coming is not what you would choose. There will be toast water, which is what happens when someone soaks stale bread in boiling water and decides that is a beverage. There may be arrowroot porridge, which has the texture of paste and the ambition of paste. If you are unwell, or if Nanny has decided you are unwell, which is a separate category, there will be beef tea, which is warm meaty water served in a cup as though the cup makes it acceptable. It does not make it acceptable. The cup is simply there as a social formality. You sit at the small table. You sit straight. Nanny does not remind you to sit straight because you have already been reminded every morning for as long as you can remember, and at this point the instruction is baked into your spine the same way the cold is baked into the floorboards. Posture is not a preference in this household. Posture is a moral position. You chew your toast water bread, which has the structural integrity of a decision you already regret, and the day begins. Getting dressed is not something you do. It is something that is done to you. You stand in the centre of the room with your arms slightly raised, while the garments arrive in a sequence that has been organised according to principles you have never been shown and were not consulted about. There is the chemise, then the flannel petticoat, then the stays, then the outer petticoat, then the dress, and if the season is anything other than high summer, a coat on top of all of that. By the time you are dressed, a measurable portion of the morning has passed. The stays deserve their own moment of attention. They are not, technically, a corset. Not yet. Not at your age. But they are in the same family, the way a recruiter and a sergeant major are in the same army. They wrap around your midsection and fasten at the back with a firmness that communicates expectation. Good posture is not a suggestion. It is something that has been engineered directly into your clothing so that slouching becomes structurally inconvenient. This is basically a wearable reminder that you are doing it wrong. Now, the layers are not arbitrary. Each one serves a purpose that someone has thought about at length, written down in a household management guide, and presented to Nanny as received wisdom. The flannel petticoat protects you from chill. The outer petticoat provides shape. The dress provides respectability. The coat provides the impression that your parents are managing you responsibly. You are, functionally, wearing a series of arguments about what a well-kept child looks like, stacked one on top of the other. Of course, the season has very little bearing on any of this. It is August. You are wearing 4 layers. Outside, the street is doing its best impression of a laundry room that nobody has aired out. Inside, the nursery is warm, in the specific way that rooms with arsenic-tinted curtains and no cross-ventilation tend to be warm. You do not complain. Complaining is not a feature of the morning routine that Nanny has scheduled. This is where the breaching enters. For the boys, until somewhere between 4 and 6 years of age, you have been wearing skirts. This is not unusual. This is just what small boys wear, because trousers are for people who have demonstrated a basic level of reliability, and the jury is still out. When the breaching finally happens, it is treated as a ceremony. There are photographs, there is a guest or two, there may be cake. The trousers arrive. Everyone agrees this is significant. You are not entirely sure what has changed, because you are still standing still while clothing is applied to you by other people. Meanwhile, the girls continue in their layers indefinitely, with the occasional addition of a pinafore on top of everything else, to protect the dress from the activities you are about to do while not visibly enjoying them. The pinafore is white. It will not stay white. This will be noted. And yet the whole operation, the layering, the fastening, the smoothing down of skirts, the buttoning of small buttons that were designed by someone who has never tried to button them at speed, takes roughly the same amount of time every morning, which is too long, and slightly longer if you fidget. Nanny does not narrate this process. She executes it, garment by garment, in silence, with the focused efficiency of someone diffusing something. When it is done, she steps back, looks at you, and makes a small adjustment to your collar that you did not know was necessary and that you will not be able to maintain past the first staircase. You are ready. Nobody has asked if you are comfortable. That is not one of the morning's categories. You have been wearing dresses for your entire conscious life. This is not a complaint. It is simply the reality of being a small boy in 1880s England, where every male child under approximately 5 wears skirts and gowns, as a matter of course, and no one finds this remarkable. But at some point between your 4th and 6th year, a decision is reached. The tailor is contacted, the household pays attention. Your mother has been planning this longer than you have been aware. She plans things, and your father is taking the afternoon off work to be present for it. The ceremony is called breeching, and it is, by Victorian standards, a significant household event. There is a new suit involved. Wool, naturally, because comfort is not the organising principle here. The jacket has buttons. The trousers have buttons. Everything has buttons. You will spend the next several years of your life in active negotiation with buttons, and this is considered an important developmental milestone. Now, the suit itself arrives wrapped in paper and handled with a seriousness normally reserved for legal documents. Your mother inspects it. Nanny inspects it. Your father nods at it once, which constitutes approval. The suit is laid out on the bed in the guest room, because your room is not considered a dignified enough setting for the suit to wait in. The suit has its own opinions about this. The suit is, frankly, a bit much. Of course, the actual putting on of the suit is a production. There is still a chemise underneath. There are still wool stockings. There are still layers between you and the outside world that would satisfy a moderately prepared mountaineer. The trousers are the new element, and they are scratchy in a way that feels almost intentional, as if the Victorian textile industry had a philosophical position on comfort and had decided against it. This is where the portraits come in. A breeching day without a formal portrait is essentially a breeching day that did not happen. You are positioned. Your hands are placed. Your expression is corrected once by your mother and once by Nanny, who has a different standard for what a composed face looks like and is not prepared to negotiate. The photographer takes a very long time. The photographer is always taking a very long time. This is a man whose entire professional existence depends on people staying perfectly still, and he has chosen to build that career in an era with no sedatives for children. He made his choices. Meanwhile, your sisters are watching from the doorway, in their full layers, plus pinafores, which are going nowhere, because breeching does not apply to them. There is no equivalent ceremony. There is no moment where a girl is handed a new outfit and told she has crossed into a new phase of personhood. There is simply more of the same, indefinitely, until the layers get slightly larger. Nobody calls this unfair out loud. Nobody calls it anything at all. It is simply Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then several decades of Wednesdays. And yet the breeching ceremony is genuinely meant as an honour. You are being recognised. You are being promoted. You are being handed a pair of trousers and told, implicitly, that you are now a small version of a man, which in Victorian England means you are expected to be quieter, sturdier, and significantly less emotional, starting more or less immediately. Your father nods at you the same way he nodded at the suit. You have been reviewed and approved. By dinner, you are seated at the table in your new clothes, buttons intact, posture monitored, aware that something has shifted. You are not entirely sure what to do with this information. The trousers are still scratchy. Nobody has mentioned this. Every morning, before breakfast and before anything else, you are given a spoonful of cod liver oil. This is not optional. There is no version of this morning in which the cod liver oil does not happen. It has been a feature of every day since someone decided it would be, and no amount of delay, strategic facial preparation, or claimed stomach upset has altered the outcome. The spoon is waiting on the tray. Nanny is standing beside the tray. The oil sits in the spoon with the quiet confidence of something that knows this interaction only ends one way. Let's talk about what cod liver oil actually is, in case the name has not fully communicated the situation. It is oil from a cod, extracted from the liver specifically, which is the part of any animal that processes everything that animal would rather not think about. It smells like the inside of a fishing boat on a warm afternoon. It has a texture that is best described as committed. Victorian physicians recommend it enthusiastically for building strong bones, sharp minds, and moral character, which suggests Victorian physicians have never actually tasted it, or have, and consider suffering educational. Now, the dosage is a full spoon, not a small spoon. The spoon Nanny uses is the large one, which she selects every morning with the focused deliberation of someone picking the correct tool for a job. You open your mouth, you receive the oil, you experience approximately 4 seconds of genuine personal crisis. Then it is over, and breakfast is presented as though nothing has happened. Nobody acknowledges what just occurred. This is considered routine. Of course, the oil is not the only morning supplement. There is also, depending on the week, and whatever the family physician has most recently endorsed, a possibility of arrowroot gruel, beef tea, or slippery elm preparation, each described in the Household Health Manual as nourishing and restorative, which are words people use when they cannot use the word palatable. Beef tea is warm water in which meat has briefly visited. Arrowroot gruel is starch dissolved in liquid and poured into a bowl with the same energy as an apology. You drink it because Nanny is watching. Meanwhile, the actual breakfast, the eggs, the toast, the reasonable food sits on the table 2 feet away, cooling at exactly the rate of your optimism. The supplements come first. This is the medical consensus. Getting to breakfast is the prize at the end of a flavour obstacle course with no particularly good prizes. This is where the family cat demonstrates better judgment than anyone will acknowledge. The cat has, on multiple mornings, approached the tray, assessed the cod liver oil, and left the room. The cat is not made to come back. Nobody comments on this. The cat has simply negotiated better terms than you have, and yet the oil does do something. Not everything the Victorians claim. Nobody's character has ever been improved by a spoonful of fish extract. But cod liver oil does contain vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids, which is essentially the same supplement you can now buy in a flavoured gel capsule that tastes faintly of lemon. They have solved this problem. They solved it after you. You receive no credit for surviving the original version. By the time breakfast actually arrives, you have been medically administered to, morally fortified, and your appetite has been comprehensively discouraged. The toast is slightly cold. The eggs are fine. Nanny refills the cup of toast water, stale bread soaked in boiling water, served warm, the Victorian answer to the question nobody asked, and places it beside your plate without comment. You drink it. The morning continues. You eat what you are given at breakfast. This is not a philosophy. It is a rule, applied without exception, and the food you are given has been selected according to principles of Victorian nutritional theory that prioritise digestive mildness over everything else, including flavour, texture, and the basic goodwill of the person eating it. On a standard morning there is bread, milk, and something warm. On a health priority morning there is arrowroot porridge, pale, translucent, and with the texture of something that started as food and is reconsidering that choice. Let's talk about arrowroot. It is made from a tropical plant, which is perhaps the most exciting fact about it, because nothing else about arrowroot qualifies as exciting. It is prescribed for children with delicate digestions, which in Victorian medical terms means any child who has recently shown an emotion. The porridge is neither thick nor thin. It exists in a state of aggressive neutrality, refusing to be satisfying in any direction. You eat it because it is in the bowl and Nanny is standing at the door. Now, if it is not an arrowroot morning, there is tapioca. Tapioca arrives in your bowl looking like something dredged from a very calm pond and is described in the family's household guide as nourishing and gentle. This is the same guide that recommends slippery elm gruel for chest complaints and invalid jelly for children who have overexerted themselves by having opinions. The guide was written in 1874 by a man with exceptional side whiskers and no formal medical training, and it is treated in this house as scripture. Of course, there is also beef tea. Beef tea is warm, brown, faintly meaty water, and it is handed to you in a small cup with the same gravity one might use to deliver results from a specialist. It was simmered overnight from a quantity of beef that has since been removed, and presumably fed to someone who is allowed to eat actual food. What remains in the cup is the idea of beef. You drink the idea of beef. It is considered restorative. Nobody has confirmed what it is restoring. Meanwhile, if you are very lucky, there is bread. Not the interesting kind. No butter, unless it is Tuesday and the household is feeling permissive. The bread is thick, slightly stale, and perfectly acceptable if you think about something else while chewing it. Victorian nutritional thinking holds that mild food produces mild temperaments, which is either a theory of digestion or a management strategy, and possibly both at the same time. This is where the approved ingredient list becomes genuinely impressive in its restraint. Egg, on occasion, milk, porridge in one of its 3 approved forms. Warm water with a small quantity of something added to it to make it technically a tonic. The kitchen is not withholding flavour out of cruelty. It is withholding flavour out of a sincere belief that your small body cannot handle stimulation before noon. This belief is held alongside the simultaneous belief that you can handle cod liver oil, beef tea, and arrowroot before 8 in the morning. And yet you finish your bowl, carrier. Not because it is delicious, not because you are hungry in any way that this breakfast meaningfully addresses. You finish because the alternative is sitting in front of an empty bowl until you do, which is how Nanny handles meal refusals, without drama, without negotiation, simply by remaining in the doorway with the specific patience of someone who has nowhere else to be and a very clear sense of who will outlast whom. She has never lost. She is not going to start today. The bowl goes back to the kitchen. The kitchen produces it tomorrow. Nanny is not simply a person. She is a governing system installed in this household before you arrived and running continuously since. She administers your schedule, your meals, your bathing, your bedtime, your vocabulary, your posture, and the sequence in which you do everything. She reports to your parents twice weekly, at which point she delivers a summary of your performance, and they nod gravely. You are not present for these briefings. You do not need to be. You have a reasonable sense of the content. The schedule tells you everything about what your parents will be hearing. Let's talk about the schedule. It exists on a card pinned to the nursery wall, written in Nanny's handwriting, which is extremely small and extremely certain. There is a time for waking, a time for washing, a time for lessons, a time for outdoor air, a time for quiet reflection, and a time for bed. There is not a time for complaining. That category was presumably considered and removed during the drafting process. Now, the rules themselves are not posted anywhere. They do not need to be. You learned them through a process that modern organisations would call onboarding and Victorian households call consequences. Rule 1. You sit straight. Rule 2. You speak when addressed. Rule 3. You address adults as directed, which means correctly and at full volume, not in the small voice you use when you already know the answer is no. Rule 4 through approximately Rule 47 are variations on Rules 1 through 3 applied to different rooms. This is where Nanny's genius becomes apparent. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. She has a look. The look is not angry. Exactly. It is more like a weather forecast. Partly cloudy, with a high probability of having your meal supervised by someone standing in the doorway until further notice. You have seen older children attempt to outlast it. They did not succeed. Of course, there are benefits to the system. Your vocabulary is excellent. Your posture, by age 6, will be the kind of posture that strangers remark upon at church. You know exactly which spoon is for soup, which fork is ceremonial, and how to fold a cloth napkin into a shape that suggests moral character. These are skills. Whether they are the skills you requested is a separate question, and one you will not be asking aloud. Meanwhile, Nanny maintains a small notebook. You have never seen the inside of it. You have, however, noticed that she writes in it after certain events The marbles incident, the curtain cord incident, the incident involving the youngest sibling and the cold beef tea that is still not entirely resolved. The notebook does not appear at the twice-weekly briefings, as far as you know. This does not make you feel better about the notebook, and yet the system, for all its architectural firmness, does have one soft point. At 7 o'clock in the evening, after the schedule has been fully executed and the nursery is quiet, Nanny sits in the chair by the window, not the punishment chair, her own chair. She reads. Occasionally she hums something without quite meaning to. The arsenic-dyed curtain cords rattle faintly. The rocking horse stands in the corner, one-eyed, waiting. Nobody is being managed at this particular moment. You pretend to be asleep. She pretends not to notice that you aren't. Lessons begin after breakfast, and they begin with your spine, specifically with its alignment, which is inspected by Nanny at the start of every session, and found wanting with a frequency that suggests your spine has developed its own position on the matter. You sit with a board against the back of the chair, your feet flat on the floor, your hands in your lap when not actively writing. You will memorize poetry, practice handwriting on paper that costs enough to make errors feel like small financial events, and recite the Kings of England, the multiplication tables, and at least one passage of improving literature that has never improved anyone. Let's talk about the handwriting. You are given a copybook with model letters printed at the top of each page, elegant, unhurried loops produced by someone who has clearly never been a child. You are expected to reproduce them exactly. Nanny holds your completed page up to the light and examines it the way a customs official examines a suspicious parcel. One imprecise loop, and you do the line again. 2 imprecise loops, and you do the page again. The copybook has opinions about your character, and so far its assessment is not favourable. Now the poetry. You are currently required to memorize 4 stanzas of a poem about virtue, 2 stanzas of a poem about industry, and 1 stanza about the English countryside that describes weather in terms, suggesting the author had never actually stood in it. You recite these aloud while maintaining correct posture. Slouching mid-recitation is considered an editorial comment and is not permitted. You deliver the lines about morning dew and birdsong from behind a back board, which is basically being forced to write a 5-star review of a restaurant you've never visited. This is where arithmetic arrives. You are given a slate and a chalk stick and a series of problems involving quantities of grain, lengths of ribbon, and hypothetical apples changing hands between unnamed parties who cannot seem to manage their own produce. The grain problems are always enormous. Nobody in your immediate life has ever required this much grain, and yet here it is. Grain, in quantities best described as geopolitical, distributed between 3 farmers, whose names you will not remember, and whose logistics remain your problem, until Nanny says to stop. Of course, there is also geography. You can name the capitals of countries that no longer exist in quite the same configuration, trace the outline of continents on a map that is slightly optimistic about certain coastlines, and identify the exports of colonies you have never visited, and will likely never visit. The globe in the corner of the room has a small chip out of the Indian Ocean. It does not affect accuracy. It does affect your confidence in the whole enterprise. Meanwhile, the improving literature sits at the end of the lesson like a dessert made of obligation. It is a passage from a morally instructive text in which a child makes a poor decision and suffers legible consequences. You read it aloud in a clear voice. You are asked what you have learned. You provide an answer that satisfies the form of the question. Nanny writes something in the notebook. You suspect the notebook has a section specifically for answers that technically comply. By mid-morning you have covered posture, penmanship, arithmetic, geography, and moral instruction, and you are approximately 9 years old. The board comes off your back during the geography portion, which counts as the day's leisure. You put your hands back in your lap and wait to be told what comes next. You have been given a sampler. It is a piece of fabric stretched on a small wooden frame, and onto it you are to stitch the alphabet, a row of numbers, a border of stylized flowers in at least 3 colors, and a short improving verse about the rewards of industry or the character of a virtuous young person. The thread is fine, the needle is thin. You have been working at this for 45 minutes. You are on the letter D. Nanny has views about the size and evenness of your stitches, and she has been sharing them continuously since you began. Let's talk about what a sampler actually is. It is, functionally, a homework assignment that you then hang on the wall when you finish it, so that everyone who enters the room can see exactly how long it took you to master the letter G, and whether your French knots were up to standard. The finished sampler is framed and displayed, which is either a celebration of your achievement or a permanent record of your worst Tuesday, depending on the quality of your cross-stitch. It is displayed either way. The improving verse you are stitching is about diligence. This is, of course, the verse you were assigned, not the verse you would have chosen. There is no version of this exercise where you are offered options. You stitch what you are given, and you stitch it neatly, and when Nanny says the bee looks like a lowercase b attempting something ambitious, you unpick the thread and begin again. The thread, which you have now unpicked 3 times, does not improve with handling. It knows this. It tangles with the energy of something that has made a decision. Now, embroidery is not the only standard being measured here. Your posture while stitching is being assessed. The angle of your wrist. Whether you are holding the frame correctly or tilting it in a way that suggests insufficient moral fortitude. Slouching over the sampler is treated as roughly equivalent to moral failure, which is consistent with how the morning has handled most things. You sit up straighter. The chair does not assist. Meanwhile, your brother, who has just been breeched and considers himself now functionally an adult, is doing no embroidery at all. He is at a different table, doing sums. The sums involve grain, which you are also familiar with from this morning. Nobody is explaining why all educational mathematics in this household is grain-based. You do not ask. Of course, the sampler has a deadline, which is not stated in any explicit terms, but is communicated through the increasing frequency of Nanny's observations about pace. At some point this afternoon, the sampler is expected to show meaningful progress, ideally through the letter M at minimum. You are currently on F. You have pricked the same finger 4 times. The improving verse about the rewards of industry seems at this moment to be taunting you, which may be what it was designed to do. This is where the sampler becomes something else entirely. It is needlework, yes. It is also penmanship assessment, moral instruction, fine motor training, and a test of whether you can sustain concentration for 2 hours on a task that requires you to manually produce the alphabet you already know. The Victorian position on this is that repetition builds character. The modern equivalent is being asked to handwrite the same email 50 times to prove you understood it. Nobody questions it. You stitch on. The finished sampler, if completed to standard, will be displayed in the parlour, where visitors will note it approvingly and ask how old you were when you made it. The correct answer will be delivered modestly. You will stand nearby, hands folded, not mentioning the finger. You are permitted to be in the room. That is the extent of your participation. The household runs on the principle that children should be seen and not heard, and in practice this means that when adult guests arrive, you are placed near the entrance in clean clothes, acknowledged briefly by name, and then expected to remain precisely where you are, still, silent, presentable, until an adult decides the display is complete and dismisses you. Speaking without being directly addressed is treated as a breach of household protocol, roughly equivalent to opening someone else's private correspondence. Let's talk about what you are wearing for this performance. It is a minimum of 4 layers, pressed that morning, and selected not for comfort, but for the impression it makes on people who will forget you by Tuesday. Your collar is stiff. Your shoes are tight in a way that suggests they were purchased for someone else, and nobody has followed up on this. Your hair has been arranged with a seriousness usually reserved for state occasions. The guests arrive. They make sounds of appreciation in your direction. One of them pinches your cheek, which is not something you requested. Another remarks that you have your mother's eyes, as if this is information you needed. You nod. You do not speak. You have been practicing the nod since Tuesday, and it is a good nod, polite, attentive, totally devoid of actual feeling. Nanny, who is stationed approximately 4 feet behind you and slightly to the left, registers the nod. She does not signal approval. She does not need to. Approval is what happens when nothing goes wrong. Now, the adults move into the drawing room. You are not invited. You are also not dismissed, which means you remain in position, uncertain, doing a very convincing impression of a decorative object. The conversation drifts. Someone laughs. You hear the word Gladstone used 3 times in a sentence, and you do not know what it means, and you will not ask, because asking would require speaking, which is not available to you right now. After some time, it may be 5 minutes, it may be 40, an adult remembers you exist and makes a small gesture in your direction. You are released. You walk at a moderate pace back to the nursery. You do not run. Running is for emergencies, and even then, only if you have asked. Of course, there is a version of this rule that applies even when no guests are present. At dinner, if the family eats together, you sit at the far end of the table and speak only when a question is directed at you. The questions are not difficult. They are usually about lessons, about posture, about whether you have been practicing your Latin declensions, but they are asked with the gravity of a formal inquiry, and your answers are evaluated for clarity, brevity, and the absence of opinions. Having opinions is not technically forbidden. Expressing them at the dinner table is something else entirely. This is where the seen and not heard rule expands beyond volume. You learn to make yourself small without actually moving. You learn to read an entire room's emotional weather from the angle of a jaw, or the way a teacup is set down, which is, essentially, the same skill as reading a group chat from tone alone, except the consequences are faster and nobody has a mute button. You learn that the chandelier has witnessed more than it is letting on. You learn that the sideboard, for its part, has no opinion on any of this, and you find this restful. Meanwhile, the embroidery sampler you finished last week is framed and hanging in the parlour, where the guests can admire it. It says, "In careful stitches, patience and virtue." One of the guests compliments your mother on it. Your mother accepts the compliment. You are not in the room. The toy are not in reach. They are in a glass-fronted cabinet across the room, arranged neatly behind locked doors, and to access any of them, you must make a formal request to Nanny, who will consider it, determine its suitability, and either grant or decline it. If granted, she will select the item herself, place it before you, and remain present for the duration of the play. The cabinet contains tin soldiers, wooden skittles, a spinning top, several porcelain-faced dolls, and a set of building blocks that have not been removed from the cabinet in recent memory. The dolls are watching from behind the glass. They have been watching for some time. Let's talk about the request process. You do not simply ask. You wait for an appropriate moment, you phrase it correctly, and you stand still while the answer is being considered. Nanny does not rush. She finishes what she is doing, which may be mending, or noting something in a small book, or simply staring at a fixed point on the wall with the quiet authority of someone who has seen everything, and then she turns her attention to you. The spinning top is usually approved. The tin soldiers are approved on days when you have behaved well, which is not every day. The building blocks have their own situation. They were a gift from a great-uncle, who is no longer discussed at dinner. They are technically yours. They are also technically in the cabinet with the door latched, and Nanny has the key on her person at all times, and the great-uncle is not here to advocate for them, and so the blocks remain. You have accepted this. You accepted it some time ago. Now, the dolls. The porcelain-faced dolls have glass eyes and painted cheeks, and an expression that suggests they have been waiting a very long time and have formed opinions about the wait. Each one has a name, recorded in neat script on a card inside the cabinet. You did not name them. The names were assigned before you arrived. This is also something you have accepted. Of course, the question of what to actually do with an approved toy is its own matter. Nanny is present. She is seated nearby with her mending. She is not watching in the way that suggests she expects catastrophe, but she is watching in the way that makes catastrophe slightly less interesting to attempt. The tin soldiers may be arranged in formation. They may not be crashed into one another, which removes roughly half of what soldiers are for. A spinning top must be kept away from the good rug, the ordinary rug, and, it turns out on further inquiry, all rugs. And yet something happens eventually. Someone tips the spinning top too hard, and it wobbles into the skirting board with a satisfying crack. Or a tin soldier is lost beneath the dresser, which Nanny notes in the small book. Or you sit on the floor with the soldiers arranged in neat rows and do nothing particularly wrong, and Nanny glances over and says nothing, which is the closest thing to approval the afternoon is going to produce. The cabinet gets relocked at 4 o'clock. The dolls resume their position. The key goes back into Nanny's pocket. Tomorrow you may ask about the spinning top again. You are given a tin soldier. It is painted in precise regimental detail. Red coat, blue trousers, a small black hat, and it is, objectively, an excellent soldier. You hold it the way you hold. Things you find interesting, closely, examined from several angles, turned over in your fingers. At some point, as children reliably do, you put it briefly in your mouth. This is standard developmental behavior. It is also, in the context of this particular toy, and approximately every toy in this cabinet, a mild and unremarkable form of lead ingestion. The paint is lead-based. This is considered normal. This is, in fact, considered paint. Let's talk about the cabinet itself. It is a dark wooden thing, glass-fronted, kept locked, and it contains roughly 40 toys that you are permitted to look at and occasionally, under supervision, hold. There are tin soldiers in several regiments. There is a wooden Noah's Ark with animals that have been arranged by species since before you were born and will remain that way after. There is a painted spinning top that Nanny has not allowed to spin in 3 weeks on account of the noise. The cabinet has opinions about access, and those opinions are no. Now, the soldiers are technically the good option. They are solid. They do not shatter. They survive being dropped, which is more than can be said for the porcelain shepherdess on the second shelf, who has already lost one hand to a Tuesday and is being held together by goodwill and a small amount of glue that smells strongly of fish. The soldiers can be lined up, marched, knocked over, and retrieved without incident. The lead paint is an invisible problem, which in Victorian domestic life puts it in excellent company. Of course, the other toys have their own positions on the matter. The wooden Noah's Ark is impractical to play with, because the animals cannot be rearranged without Nanny noticing and returning them, at some point that evening, to their original configuration without comment. The Ark itself is painted in red and yellow, with a finish that flakes in dry weather. You have eaten some of that finish. Everyone has eaten some of that finish. It is not discussed. Meanwhile, the spinning top sits on its shelf looking genuinely aggrieved. It was built to spin. It has not spun. It has been stationary on a velvet-lined shelf for a period that constitutes, by any reasonable standard, an imprisonment. The top has done nothing wrong. The top has simply made too much noise on one occasion and is now serving an indefinite sentence next to a rattle that nobody has shaken since the summer. This is where the tin soldier's lead content becomes almost beside the point. The toy is, technically, functional. It can be held, examined, marched across a windowsill, and involved in small tactical engagements against the other 12 soldiers in the regiment. You can stage a battle on the nursery floor between the blocks, which smells faintly of linseed oil and old bread, and the soldiers will fall over dramatically and stay where they land, which is genuinely satisfying in a way that the Noah's Ark animals, bolted in place by Nanny's worldview, simply cannot compete with. The soldiers are the closest thing in this cabinet to a toy that functions like a toy, and yet you put one back in your mouth for a moment, briefly, in the way that hands sometimes act, before the brain has fully weighed in. This is the third time today. The soldier's red coat tastes of nothing identifiable. It tastes the way paint tastes, which is to say it tastes of mild regret and metallic certainty. You put it down on the windowsill in a small formation. You adjust the angle. Outside, a pigeon lands on the window ledge and regards the regiment without visible concern. The pigeon has better instincts than the decade you are taken outside for fresh air and the improvement of your physical constitution, which is presented to you as though it might be an enjoyable experience. You walk in a small procession, you in front, Nanny behind, through whatever park or path the neighbourhood offers, dressed in your full outdoor complement. Coat, hat, gloves, and enough underlayers that bending at the knee requires some advance planning. You are not to run, you are not to touch any plant material, you are not to pick anything up from the ground. You are permitted to observe nature within reason for the duration of the walk. Now, the walk has a curriculum. This is not a stroll. You are expected to name the trees as you pass them, not their common names, which would be too easy, but their Latin ones. Quercus robur, Fraxinus excelsior. You are 5. You recite them anyway, in the flat tone of someone reading off a grocery receipt they did not write. Nanny nods. A pigeon ignores you. The pigeon has no idea what Quercus robur means, and is frankly thriving. The outdoors is educational, medicinal, and morally bracing. It is not fun. Fun is a byproduct that may occur accidentally, but it is not the goal and should not be mentioned. The goal is fresh air, correct posture, and the memorization of at least one improving poem about a flower you are not allowed to touch. You have memorized 4. You have touched nothing. Of course, the fresh air itself is doing somewhat variable work, depending on the neighbourhood. In the city, the air carries a baseline note of coal smoke, horse, and whatever the tannery 3 streets over is processing this week. The doctor has endorsed this walk. The doctor has endorsed several things. You file this alongside his other recommendations and keep walking. Meanwhile, there is a buttercup at the edge of the path. You see it. Nanny sees you see it. A brief negotiation occurs without words. The buttercup remains untouched. You continue forward, hands clasped behind your back, in the posture Nanny refers to as correct carriage, and the rest of the world would describe as a small person under mild arrest. And yet there are small victories. A beetle crosses the path. You are not forbidden from watching beetles. This oversight has never been corrected, and you are not going to raise it. You watch the beetle for 11 seconds before Nanny redirects your attention to a nearby elm and asks its name. Ulmus glabra, you say without looking up. The beetle continues on, unbothered, living its best life. The walk lasts approximately 40 minutes. You return home with rosy cheeks, which is considered the primary evidence that the exercise has worked. Your boots are muddy at the toe, you are not sure how given the prohibitions, and Nanny notices this in the hallway with an expression that suggests it will be discussed. In any do the a free-botted sot, you have committed no visible infractions. You have also not enjoyed yourself in any documentable way, which is more or less the intended outcome. The elm, at least, seemed indifferent to the whole arrangement. The nature walk is also a Latin lesson. At intervals along the route, Nanny stops beside a plant, a dandelion, a cluster of dock leaves, the hedge belonging to a house you have passed 40 times this year, and she waits. You are expected to produce, in order, the Latin name, the common English name, and one fact of educational or moral significance about the plant in question. You have a card in your coat pocket with 12 plants carefully memorized. The walk typically passes more than 12. The gap between 12 and whatever the actual number is today is where things become tense. Let's talk about what happens when you guess. You have options. You can attempt a Latin-sounding word and hope Nanny is not entirely certain herself, which works occasionally, mostly on plants she has also never encountered and does not want to admit. You can pivot immediately to the moral fact, delivering it with such conviction that the name question becomes structurally bypassed. Or you can stand very still and say nothing, which Nanny interprets as reverence for nature, and sometimes lets pass. None of these strategies work twice in the same week. The card in your pocket was prepared by your older sister, who memorized 16 plants last year and is now considered an authority. She wrote them in her best copper plate, numbered them, and included two she invented entirely, Folia gravitas and Herba inevitabilis, on the theory that Nanny would never check and the walk would eventually leave documented evidence of a plant unknown to science. Your sister is in many respects operating at a level the household has not fully accounted for. Now the touching rule: you may look at a plant, you may lean toward it, within reason. You may describe it aloud in 2 languages and attribute it a moral quality. What you may not do is touch it, pick it, crouch beside it for longer than is educationally defensible, or express visible delight in it. This last restriction is technically unwritten. It is, however, enforced. A child who laughs at a caterpillar has begun a sequence of events that ends with a short walk home and a longer conversation indoors. Of course, there are compensations. The walk goes past a baker's on Tuesdays, and the smell coming from it is entirely outside Nanny's jurisdiction. There is a wall on the corner that a dog has claimed as its personal correspondence office, and reading the dog's wall is technically observing urban natural history, which is adjacent to education. There is a ditch near the park entrance where something interesting happens every single time, and you are never allowed close enough to determine what. You file it away. You will come back to the ditch eventually. You have a plan. This is where the walk gets philosophical. If you are 7 and trapped in 4 layers of wool, the plants are there. You can see them. You can name them in 2 languages and explain what they mean to the medieval apothecary tradition. What you cannot do is pick one up and look at the underside, which is the only part of a plant that ever has anything genuinely interesting happening on it. Victorian outdoor education is, functionally, a tour of things you are allowed to describe but not interact with. Like a museum, but the exhibits are alive, and also there are goats sometimes. You make it to plant 14. You produce something close enough to correct that Nanny writes it down in her small brown notebook, which means it counts. The walk turns for home. The card in your pocket now has a smudge on it from where you pressed it against the baker's wall to smell the bread better. You have memorized 13 plants. 14, really, if you count the one your sister invented. You probably should not count that one. Fresh air is a medical instruction in this household. It is scheduled, prescribed and treated as the primary intervention for a range of childhood conditions: poor appetite, poor colour, poor posture, general insufficient vitality. You are sent outside into it twice daily. The air outside is the air of 1880s urban England, which carries coal smoke from several thousand homes, the byproducts of horse-drawn traffic, and in certain wind directions, a quality contributed by nearby industries that polite households refer to only as a particular smell and do not otherwise discuss. This is the prescribed fresh air. You receive it on schedule. The theory behind all of this is the miasma framework, which holds that bad air causes illness and good air prevents it. The good air is identified by its freshness, which is a quality nobody precisely defines, but which the nanny appears to detect by standing at the nursery window with her eyes closed for a moment, and then announcing a verdict. Today's air has been approved. You put on your coat. Now, let's talk about what you are walking through. The street outside your house is a working Victorian street, which means it is generously upholstered in horse manure, coal soot, and the occasional mystery liquid from an upper window that has never been explained. The fog, when it arrives, is not atmospheric. It is the colour of a used penny and smells of sulphur and ambition, and it sits at roughly child height, which is a detail that would concern a modern urban planner, but which the Victorian medical establishment classifies as bracing. You breathe it in. It is, officially, good for you. This is where the fresh air ideology and the industrial city have a disagreement that nobody in authority acknowledges. The same household that boils the vegetables for 3 hours to remove impurities sends you out to inhale a street that is functionally a slow-moving coal byproduct. The nanny does not see a contradiction. She sees a child who is getting colour in its cheeks, though in fairness, that colour may be particulate matter. Of course, the solution to insufficient outdoor air for infants too young to walk is the window cage. The window cage is a wire enclosure mounted to the outside of the apartment window, designed to suspend a bundled infant in open air, 2 or 3 stories above the street, while the mother continues with household duties indoors. The baby is placed inside it like a slightly confused canary. The cage is padded on the floor. There is a wool blanket. In rain, an oilcloth cover is fitted over the top, which turns the whole arrangement into a damp, wool-scented submarine at altitude. In cold weather, a hot water bottle is introduced. In summer, pigeons discover it and treat it as a premium residential address. Meanwhile, local doctors are known to endorse this practice during their street rounds, occasionally glancing up at the cages as they pass and nodding in the way that indicates professional approval, and not looking twice. The family photograph album contains a captioned entry: Our Little Skylark, July 1887. The child in the photograph is bundled to the eyebrows and looking at a pigeon with an expression of complete philosophical resignation, and yet the fresh air doctrine is genuinely believed. The people prescribing outdoor exposure are doing so because they think it helps, and in certain narrow respects it does. Light, movement, a brief escape from a nursery whose wallpaper contains arsenic and whose paint contains lead, and whose mattress is breathing camphor into the room all night. The nursery wallpaper has opinions about your health, and none of them are good. The coal-scented street, by comparison, is the better option. Nobody says this out loud. You come back inside after 45 minutes. The nanny marks the time. Your cheeks are pink. Your lungs have done their best. You hang up your coat and sit down for afternoon lessons, and the arsenic curtain cords rattle gently as someone opens a window to let in a little more fresh air. If you are an infant, genuinely infant level, not yet walking or forming coherent objections, fresh air is delivered to you via a wire cage fixed to the outside of the nursery window. You are bundled in wool, placed inside, and the latch is secured. The cage extends out from the building's facade at a height above the street that varies depending on your floor. Below you, the city continues. Carts, horses, pedestrians, who occasionally glance upward, with the expression of people who have decided this is not their business. The doctor has approved this arrangement. The doctor was, in fact, the person who suggested it. The cage itself is a practical piece of engineering. Wire mesh on 4 sides, a wooden base, ventilated enough to allow the therapeutic urban air to circulate freely around your small person. The nanny checks the latch twice before stepping back inside. She does this not because she doubts the construction, but because she is a professional, and latches are her business. You remain outside. The city pigeons register your arrival with the focused attention of creatures who have identified this spot as a potential opportunity. You are not equipped to negotiate with pigeons. Nobody considered this when designing the cage. Now, weather does not cancel the arrangement. Rain means the cage acquires a small oilcloth cover, which keeps the worst of it off while maintaining the essential principle. Snow means a hot water bottle is tucked alongside you before deployment, which is the Victorian equivalent of turning on the heated seat. Summer means the pigeons are at their most optimistic, and the street below smells strongly of horse and ambition. The cage continues. Fresh air is fresh air. The season is not a counter-argument. Of course, the families who practiced this considered it thoroughly modern. Baby cages represented the forward-thinking intersection of medical science and domestic management. You were not being left outside. You were receiving treatment. There is a difference, and the difference is that someone wrote it down in a pamphlet. The pamphlet had a serious-looking title and was sold near the chemist's. This was sufficient. This is where the family photograph album becomes relevant. The cage and its small occupant was considered picturesque enough to document. captions ran along the lines of "Our Little Skylark, July 1887, written in careful copperplate, as though the wire and the two-story drop were scenic accessories. The photographs were shown to visitors. Visitors nodded approvingly. Some asked for the name of a good ironmonger. Meanwhile, the infant in the cage has a limited set of responses available. Sleeping is popular. Watching the street below with the unreadable expression common to babies and senior civil servants is another option. Occasionally there is crying, which carries well in open air, and reaches the nanny inside with a clarity that indoor walls would have softened. This is one small architectural advantage of the arrangement. The nanny hears everything, and yet the baby in the cage is, by the standards of the decade, doing well. The air outside is marginally less camphor-saturated than the nursery. The horsehair mattress and its lavender-masked smell are temporarily not your problem. The arsenic curtains are on the other side of the glass. Out here, the main hazard is the pigeon on the left corner of the cage, who has been there since before you arrived, and shows no interest in leaving. You have reached an understanding. Nobody mentions it. At dinner, the window cage operates year-round. There is no weather condition that officially suspends the fresh air session. In rain, an oilcloth cover is fitted over the cage frame, which addresses the water while leaving the cold and the height entirely intact. In winter, a small hot water bottle is added to the wool wrappings, extending the session by the duration of the bottle's warmth. In summer, the cage is warm, exposed, and positioned at exactly the right elevation to attract the local pigeon population, who treat the exterior bars as preferred perching territory and are not aware that the cage is occupied. They have not been moved along. They know something about their position here. Now, the hot water bottle is a serious piece of equipment. It is filled, wrapped in flannel, and tucked alongside the infant with the care of someone packing a very fragile parcel for a journey of undetermined length. Say, the bottle holds its warmth for approximately 45 minutes. After that, you are relying on wool, on philosophy, and on the general Victorian conviction that cold air builds character. The infant has no position on the matter. The infant is wearing 3 hats. Let's talk about what it looks like from the street. A passerby in the winter of 1887 walks along the pavement below your building and glances up. There, mounted to the exterior wall 2 floors above, is a small wire box. Inside the box is a bundle of wool approximately the size and shape of a Christmas pudding, not moving, facing outward, possibly blinking. The passerby adjusts their scarf and continues walking. This is considered a sign of a well-managed household. Of course, the doctor endorses it. He has mentioned it favourably during at least one street-level consultation, which was conducted while he was also walking somewhere else. His endorsement is delivered over the shoulder and takes approximately 6 seconds. It counts. You have written it down in the household journal next to a note about the coal delivery and a recipe for arrowroot pudding. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, you can hear the cage. In wind, the frame produces a low, intermittent rattle that travels through the wall and into the nursery. This is not considered alarming. The nanny has heard it so many times that she no longer looks up from her needlework when it starts. The rattle is simply part of the room's ambient sound, along with the creak of the horsehair mattress, the distant sound of someone boiling something in the kitchen, and the pigeon who has returned. The pigeon is persistent. In summer it arrives early, claims the upper left corner of the exterior frame, and settles in with an attitude of complete institutional entitlement. Spuck, you have tried the oilcloth as a deterrent. The pigeon sat on the oilcloth. You have tried noise. The pigeon is not interested in noise. It has been here longer than the current infant, and it intends to remain. The baby, for its part, regards the pigeon with the calm focus of someone who has not yet developed opinions, but is accumulating data. And yet, the cage persists through all of it. The rain, the cold, the pigeon, the rattle, the flannel-wrapped bottle going lukewarm at the 40-minute mark. You lower the cage, retrieve the infant, unwrap approximately 4 layers of wool, and carry the baby back inside to the nursery, where the arsenic-green curtains hang still and the camphor-scented pillow waits in the cot. The baby smells of outside air and, faintly, of bird. This is considered a successful morning. When the baby is teething, the household enters a state of managed emergency that everyone agrees to treat as temporary, despite the evidence. The baby has been crying since Monday. It is now Friday. You, the older sibling, old enough to understand instructions and the consequences of not following them, have been conscripted into the relief effort. Your assignment is to reduce the crying, or at minimum to produce a different kind of crying, through entertainment, rattles, facial expressions, rhythmic objects, anything in arm's reach that might redirect the baby's attention away from whatever is happening in its mouth. This is your contribution to household stability. You are 7. Let's talk about the rattle. It is silver-plated, shaped like a small dumbbell, and cold to the touch in every season, because the nursery runs about 4 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. You have been shaking it for 11 minutes. The baby remains unimpressed. The rattle has by this point formed its own opinion of the situation, and that opinion is that it would prefer to be put down. You keep shaking it anyway, because the nanny is watching from the doorway, and her watching has a specific quality that discourages stopping. Now, the adults have their own approach to the teething crisis, and it is more pharmaceutical. The soothing syrup comes out of a cabinet that is kept locked the rest of the year. It has a name like Dr. Somebody's infant quieting compound on the label, which is accurate in the way that a wanted poster is accurate, technically correct, leaves out considerable detail. What it does not say on the label is that the active ingredient is opium or alcohol, or both, depending on the batch and the manufacturer's mood that week. The dosage instructions read as needed, which in 1887 means whatever volume produces the desired result. The baby receives a small spoonful. Within 20 minutes, the baby is asleep. Everyone agrees this is medicine working. Of course, if the syrup is unavailable, there is whiskey. This is not considered unusual. This is considered resourceful. A cloth is dipped, the cloth is applied to the gum. The problem is briefly addressed. Your mother explains this with the same tone she uses for laundry instructions. You file it alongside the other things in this house that you have decided not to think about too carefully. This is where your older duties expand. While the baby is being medicated into temporary silence, you are responsible for the interim period. The window between still crying and asleep, which is the loudest part and lasts an indeterminate amount of time that feels like considerably more than it is. You have tried the rattle. You have tried the faces. You have tried holding a wooden soldier at various angles to see if the baby has preferences. The baby does not have preferences. The baby has grievances. Meanwhile, the rest of the household is attempting to proceed normally. Your father has retreated to his study on the grounds that he is working, which is a theory. The cook is in the kitchen explaining, not for the first time, that she cannot hear herself think, and that something in the soup has gone wrong as a result. The cat has not been seen since Tuesday, which is probably unrelated, and yet the baby, eventually, stops. Not because of the rattle, or the soldier, or the 11 different faces you made, or the small experimental song you performed without being asked. It stops because the syrup has been administered, or the whiskey cloth has been applied, or because teething, like all household crises, eventually pauses on its own schedule, regardless of intervention. The nanny marks something in the daily log. You put down the rattle, nobody says thank you, because you are 7, and this is simply what 7 is for. When no other remedy has produced results, the soothing syrup is brought out. It comes in a small labelled bottle with a reassuring name, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, Godfrey's Cordial, Atkinson's Royal Infant Preservative, available from the chemist, recommended by doctors, and used in households across the country as a standard response to infant distress. The dosing instructions are printed on the label, in teaspoons. There is no mention anywhere on the bottle of the morphine. The alcohol is also unmentioned. Both are present in quantities that have been found to be effective, and effectiveness is generally confirmed within a few minutes of administration. Let's talk about the marketing. The bottle is elegant. The label features a serene infant, possibly asleep, possibly in a state that medical science would later categorize somewhat differently. The name includes the word soothing, which is accurate, and the word preservative, which is doing a great deal of work for a product that contains opiates. You are not reading this as a warning. You are reading it as a recommendation, because it appears directly below the phrase, as recommended by physicians throughout the British Isles, and the physician who recommended it had very impressive side whiskers and a consulting fee that implied expertise. Now, Godfrey's cordial deserves a separate mention. It has been in circulation since the 1700s. By the 1880s, it is practically a household institution, right alongside the coal scuttle and the aspidistra. Its active ingredients include treacle, water, spices, and laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol, which is a combination that no modern pharmacist would hand you across a counter, but which your chemist will wrap in paper and tie with string as if it is a birthday present. It quiets the infant. It quiets the household. It quiets, frankly, most things within a reasonable radius. Of course, nobody is describing this as a concern. The concern, from the household's perspective, is the crying. The crying is the problem that has been solved. The bottle solved it. The bottle is consequently viewed with considerable warmth. Several brands print testimonial letters from grateful mothers on their packaging, a practice that is basically a 5-star review system for giving your baby morphine. This is where the dosing becomes interesting. The label says 1 teaspoon. The label also says this may be repeated. The label does not specify how many times. This is left to your discretion, which is a significant amount of trust to place in a parent whose primary qualification is desperation, and whose previous remedy was a whiskey-soaked cloth. Some households develop what they call a feel for it. This is another way of saying they have done this enough times that they have formed their own opinions about the teaspoon. Meanwhile, the patent medicine market is thriving. There are syrups for teething, syrups for colic, syrups for general infant fretfulness, which is a medical category that covers everything from genuine distress to the infant having opinions about dinner. Each one is slightly different in name. Several of them are essentially identical in composition. The branding is the variable. The morphine content is fairly consistent, and yet the physicians endorse them. Not all physicians, and not always the physicians you might prefer, but physicians with printed letterhead and framed certificates who have concluded that infant quiet is a medical outcome worth pursuing by whatever means are currently available at the chemist on the high street. One popular syrup lists its endorsements by county. It has been recommended across 14 counties. The baby on the label continues to look serene. You administer the teaspoon. The baby accepts it with what you choose to interpret as gratitude. The house goes quiet. The nanny notes the time in her ledger with the neutral handwriting of someone who has done this before and expects to do it again tomorrow. The bottle goes back on the shelf between the camphorated oil and the bottle of beef extract, where it will remain until next needed, which is probably Thursday. When you are ill, or suspected of being ill, or have recently been ill and the household wants formal confirmation that the illness has resolved, the doctor is summoned. He arrives with a bag, a title, and in many cases a set of side whiskers impressive enough to function as professional credentials on their own. He examines you, briefly, with instruments that are primarily communicative rather than diagnostic, and delivers a verdict. The verdict will involve one of 3 things: fresh air, a patent remedy available from a specific chemist, or beef tea. Sometimes all 3, which is how you know the appointment is going well. Let's talk about beef tea. Beef tea is warm, meaty water. It is produced by simmering a quantity of beef for a significant period of time. straining out anything that might be considered food and serving the resulting liquid in a cup as though it is a treat. It tastes like a roast dinner filtered through disappointment. The doctor prescribes it for weakness, for pallor, for general childhood inadequacy, and occasionally as a follow-up to the fresh air recommendation, on the theory that 2 ineffective interventions delivered simultaneously are more effective than one. Now, the doctor himself, he may hold a medical degree. He may hold a certificate of attendance at a series of lectures delivered by a man who also held a certificate of attendance. The distinction between these two things is rarely discussed in the sitting room. What matters is the title, the bag, and the side whiskers, which by the 1880s have become so culturally load-bearing that a clean-shaven physician would struggle to prescribe anything more serious than a biscuit. He has opinions about fresh air that border on evangelical. He endorses the window cage. He may have seen it on his rounds, nodded approvingly at the bundle suspended 2 stories above the street, and written something encouraging in a small notebook. This is where the patent remedies enter the picture. The doctor does not always prescribe from the patent market directly. Sometimes he simply gestures toward it, mentions a chemist, drops a brand name, nods in the direction of the shelf where Mrs. Winslow's already lives. The chemist, meanwhile, has his own opinions, a glass display case of brown bottles, and a manner that suggests he completed a correspondence course and found it mostly agreed with him. Between the doctor and the chemist, you are prescribed a rotating selection of remedies whose active ingredients include compounds that would, in a later century, require a locked cabinet and a signature. Of course, the fresh air prescription is the most durable. It covers everything. Cough, fresh air, fever, fresh air. General listlessness interpreted as a moral failing, fresh air, supervised, with Latin recitation. The fact that the fresh air in question frequently arrives pre-seasoned, with coal smoke, horse particulate, and whatever the tannery 2 streets over is processing this week, does not significantly alter the prescription. The doctor delivers it with confidence. Confidence in Victorian medicine is doing a great deal of work. The visit concludes. The doctor replaces his instruments, which are primarily decorative, in the bag, accepts a small payment, and departs. The household feels reassured. You have been examined, declared salvageable, and issued a course of treatment involving warm meat water and a walk. Your mother writes the chemist's recommendation in a small household notebook beside the entry for the soothing syrup, the cod liver oil, and the name of the man who came last spring and advised cold baths. The notebook is filling up. Nobody has flagged a pattern. You are not aware that the wallpaper is poisonous. This is a fact shared equally by everyone in the household. The decorator who selected it, the family who approved it, and the doctor who visits monthly and has remarked favourably on the colour. The paper is a fashionable deep green, the kind that signals taste and costs accordingly, and it covers 3 walls of the nursery. You press your palm flat against it sometimes, because the surface has an interesting chalky quality, and it leaves a faint residue on your hand. No one has told you not to touch it. At this point, no one has a reason to. The colour is called Scheele's green, though you do not know that. The dye that produces it contains arsenic, not a trace amount, not an industrial accident, a deliberate structural amount of arsenic, chosen specifically because it produces a particularly vivid shade that competitors have struggled to match. The wallpaper manufacturer is proud of this. The shade has won awards. There is probably a certificate somewhere. Let's talk about what happens when Victorian wallpaper gets damp. Mould interacts with the arsenic compound in the dye and converts it into a gas, trimethylarsine, if you want to be technical about it, which no one in this nursery is. The gas is faintly sweet-smelling. The nursery smells faintly sweet. The nanny has attributed this to the lavender sachets she places in the linen drawer. The lavender sachets are doing a great deal of work socially, considering they are not the source of anything. The curtains also contain arsenic. This is not a coincidence. Arsenic-based dyes were used across the full range of Victorian home furnishings: carpets, curtains, wallpaper, dress fabric, because the colour held. It did not fade in sunlight. It did not wash out. It just quietly released trace compounds into the air of every room it decorated. The curtain cords rattle softly when the window opens. You have fallen asleep to that sound every night of your remembered life. Meanwhile, the toys are painted. The wooden soldiers along the shelf have red coats and white faces and small black boots, and the paint is lead-based, because all paint is lead-based, because lead makes paint dry evenly and hold colour, and no one has yet connected this to anything worth mentioning. You chew on a soldier's boot sometimes when you are bored, which the nanny considers a character deficiency. She is not wrong that it is a problem. She is wrong about why. The rocking horse in the corner was painted the same way. It is missing one eye and one leg, which gives it a philosophical expression that seems, in retrospect, appropriate. It has been in this nursery through 3 children. Its paint is flaking at the ears. Nobody repaints it, because the flaking is considered aesthetic wear and not a delivery mechanism. The horse does not offer an opinion on this. It simply stands. Of course, the ceiling has been recently insulated against cold. The material packed between the joists above the nursery is asbestos-based, selected because it does not burn. This is genuinely useful. Victorian nurseries were heated by open fires, and fire is a legitimate concern. The insulation is, on its own terms, doing its job perfectly. It is doing several other things as well, at a microscopic level, but that accounting will not come due for decades. You do not know any of this. You know that the walls are green, the horse has one eye, the curtains rattle, and the room smells faintly of something sweet. You know that your palm sometimes looks dusty after you touch the wall. You wipe it on your pinafore. The pinafore is also green. When you have done something wrong, spoken at table without being addressed, failed a recitation, displayed visible impatience during a lesson, you are sent to the punishment chair. The chair is a specific chair. It has a location, typically beneath the most severe portrait in the room, and being sent to it is a formal procedure with formal steps. The announcement of the offence, the instruction to proceed, the walk across the room, the sitting down. You sit with your hands in your lap and your eyes directed forward. You wait for the duration that has been specified. The portrait watches you. You look at the portrait back. Let's talk about the portrait. It is almost certainly of a man who died before you were born, who would have had opinions about posture, idleness, and the moral dangers of visible enjoyment. He is painted in 3/4 view, which means no matter where you sit in the room, he appears to be addressing you specifically. The artist has done something unfortunate with his eyes. They follow you. You are 6 years old, and you are being judged by oil paint, and this, in this household, is considered an appropriate substitute for a conversation. The chair itself has a history. It has been in this room longer than you have, longer than your siblings have, longer than the nanny has. The wood is dark, and the seat is not padded. This is not an accident. Nobody sat down one day and thought we should make the punishment chair comfortable. The discomfort is the architecture. The chair is doing its job. Now, what you did wrong is upon reflection debatable. You spoke at table before being addressed, which is technically correct. What you said was that the beef tea tasted like warm regret, which was accurate and therefore worse. The offence has been recorded, not in writing but in the nanny's expression, which functions as a ledger. She does not forget. She does not approximate. She noted the offence, assigned it a duration 15 minutes, which in punishment chair time converts to somewhere between 40 minutes and geological, and pointed at the chair without breaking eye contact. This is where the ritual earns its full weight. The walk across the room is public. Your siblings watch from their respective positions. The younger one does not fully understand what is happening, but absorbs the general atmosphere and looks appropriately solemn, because social calibration begins early in Victorian households, and your sister is nothing if not an early adopter. The older one looks at her embroidery. Darn Fryth. This is mercy, in the form of not watching. You accept it. Of course, the other children will be sent here too eventually. The chair operates on a rotating basis. There is no child in this household who has not made the walk, who has not sat beneath the portrait, who has not tried and failed to find a comfortable position on a seat, that has philosophically rejected the concept. Your brother holds the household record 4 times in 1 week for infractions ranging from running indoors to failing to run indoors fast enough when asked. A scheduling conflict that nobody has ever satisfactorily resolved. You sit, you wait, the arsenic curtains move faintly near the window. The portrait does not blink, because it is a portrait, but the effect is the same. Somewhere on the other side of the room, a lesson continues. You can hear the recitation starting up again. Latin names, plant taxonomy, something about a genus of fern that has never done anything to anyone. You know all the words. You said them correctly this morning. The beef tea is what did you in? 15 minutes pass. The nanny says your name. You stand. You return to your position. Nobody mentions it again, which is not forgiveness so much as procedure. The chair is already waiting for the next occupant. It always is. The household maintains a specific set of implements for corporal punishment, and each one corresponds to a specific category of offence. The wooden spoon is for mealtime infractions. The cane is for academic failures. The slipper is for nursery disturbances. The hairbrush is reserved for offences committed at or near bedtime, which means it will not be used until the following morning, which means you spend whatever remains of the evening and the entire night aware of exactly what tomorrow begins with. The system is organised. It has categories, it has process, and an internal logic that you are learning, over time, to navigate. Now, the wooden spoon lives on a hook beside the kitchen door, which is not subtle. It is there when you come in for breakfast. It is there when you leave. It watches. The cook treats it as a neutral piece of kitchen equipment, which is technically accurate and also deeply unsettling. You have eaten porridge under its supervision every morning for 6 years, and you have never once stopped noticing it. The cane belongs to the schoolroom, kept in the tall cupboard to the right of the chalkboard. It comes out for incorrect Latin declensions, failed memorization of dates, and once for legible but insufficiently enthusiastic penmanship. That last one surprised everyone, including the tutor. He seemed mildly embarrassed about it afterward. The cane was put back quietly, and nobody referred to the incident again, which is more or less how most things are handled in this house. The slipper is the most democratic of the instruments, because nursery disturbances are easy to produce and difficult to avoid when you are confined in a room with 3 siblings, a one-eyed rocking horse, and nothing to do after 4 in the afternoon. You have received the slipper for laughing too loudly, for failing to stop laughing when told, and for the offence technically logged by the nanny as laughing in a manner inconsistent with the hour. She has a gift for documentation. This is where the hairbrush becomes its own distinct category of problem. It is not the hairbrush itself, it is the timing. Bedtime offences are noted, recorded, and held overnight. You are told what is coming. You are then expected to sleep. This is, in theory, the corrective period, during which you are meant to reflect on your behaviour and arrive at genuine remorse. In practice, you lie on the horsehair mattress, smell the lavender and camphor coming off the pillow, and think about the hairbrush with a level of focus that would genuinely impress your Latin tutor. Of course, the implements are kept in separate locations, which means the nature of the offence is visible in where the adult goes first. You learn to read the room by reading the trajectory. Kitchen door means spoon. Schoolroom cupboard means cane. The corner of the nanny's bureau means slipper. The dressing table means tomorrow. You develop, by around age 7, a fairly reliable early warning system that would not embarrass a minor intelligence operation. And yet the strangest part is that the system is treated by every adult in the house as entirely reasonable. There is no discussion of whether 4 categories of implement is perhaps 1 or 2 more than necessary. The household simply maintains the system the way it maintains the coal schedule and the Tuesday menu as infrastructure. The nanny logs each incident in her record book with the same brisk efficiency she applies to the laundry count. The hairbrush is back on the dressing table now. It has been there since last night. You know exactly what it is waiting for. You are thirsty. This is a manageable problem with a straightforward resolution, and that resolution is toast water. Toast water is prepared by soaking stale bread in boiling water, allowing it to soften and partially dissolve into the liquid, straining out the larger remaining pieces and serving the result warm in a cup. It is pale, slightly cloudy, faintly savoury, and it tastes precisely like what it is, the water that bread was in. It is prescribed for children as gentle on the digestion and properly hydrating. It is your standard daily beverage. It is available at any meal. You drink it. Now, let's talk about your other options. And there are none. The Victorians are aware that water exists. They are simply unconvinced that plain water, unimproved by the presence of bread, is doing enough. Toast water is water that has tried. It has been given purpose, structure, a reason to be in the room. Plain water is just sitting there. That is not the kind of thinking that built an empire, and it is not the kind of thinking that will be served to children in this household. Of course, if toast water feels insufficient, and it does, constantly there is beef tea. Beef tea is prepared by simmering meat in water until the meat has communicated everything it has to say into the liquid, at which point the meat is removed and the liquid is served warm in a cup. It tastes like the memory of a roast. It is prescribed as a health tonic, recommended for strengthening the constitution and supporting the digestion, which is apparently doing very badly despite all the toast water. Beef tea is basically a subscription service for the concept of dinner, delivered without any of the dinner. This is where arrowroot enters the picture. Arrowroot is a fine white powder made from tropical plant starch. When mixed with hot water and milk, it becomes a pale, smooth, utterly featureless paste that sits in a bowl and declines to have flavour. It is served as a meal. It is intended to be restorative. The nanny presents it without apology, which is the correct way to present arrowroot, because an apology would only raise questions she does not have time to answer. Meanwhile, there is tapioca. Tapioca is arrowroot but with texture, small gelatinous pearls suspended in warm milk, and texture is the one thing arrowroot did not need. You eat it with a spoon, slowly, thinking about nothing, because tapioca does not encourage thought. Slippery elm gruel is also available, made from the powdered bark of an elm tree, which is exactly what it tastes like. The Victorians have looked at a tree and thought, that should be breakfast, and they have acted on it. And yet, within this landscape, there is one bright moment. Once a week, if the week has gone acceptably, if the nanny's logbook has not accumulated too many entries, if posture drills were completed without visible resentment, if no one asked a question that sounded like an argument, there is invalid jelly. Invalid jelly is a sweet, lightly flavoured gelatin served in a small glass mould. It wobbles. It is the most exciting thing that has happened since Monday. You eat it in 4 bites, not because you are being restrained, but because you have decided to make it last. The glass is empty in under 2 minutes. The cod liver oil arrives regardless of the week's outcome. It is not a reward. It is not a punishment. It simply is. Like the wallpaper and the nanny, and the sound of the floorboard outside the nursery door. 1 spoonful every morning, administered with the efficient compassion of someone who knows it is terrible and has decided that knowing is sufficient. The spoon has been in this household longer than you have. It does not care about your feelings. You swallow. The day begins. If you are unwell, running a temperature, coughing at a frequency that concerns the household, or simply looking pale in a way that cannot be attributed to the lighting, you are placed on a course of beef tea. Beef tea is produced by simmering beef in water until the water has absorbed sufficient beef to be considered medicinal, then straining the solids out and serving the liquid hot in a small cup. It smells precisely like what it is. It tastes precisely like what it is. In Victorian medical vocabulary, this is a restorative. In most other vocabularies, it is warm, meaty water delivered with high expectations. Now, the prescription of beef tea is not casual. There is a logic to it, and the logic has been explained to you with great seriousness by at least 2 adults who appear to believe it. Beef contains nutrients. Hot water opens the pores. The combination, served at regular intervals throughout the day, will restore vitality to even the most depleted constitution. You are given a cup in the morning, a cup at midday, and a cup in the late afternoon. Between cups you rest. The beef tea is doing something. Nobody specifies what. Let's talk about who prescribed it. In some households, this is the family doctor, a man of considerable professional bearing, impressive side whiskers, and a leather bag he carries with great authority and opens with theatrical deliberation. His formal medical qualifications may be extensive, or they may consist primarily of the side whiskers and the bag. Either way, he has recommended beef tea, and beef tea is what you will have. He may also recommend fresh air, reduced excitement, and the avoidance of cold draughts. These cost nothing to recommend. The beef tea costs the cook an afternoon. Of course, the cook has opinions about this. She has simmered the beef. She has strained the beef. She has ladled the resulting liquid into a small cup and carried it upstairs on a tray with a cloth napkin, because even medicinal meat water is served correctly in this household. The beef itself, the actual solid portion, the part that arguably contains most of whatever nutrients were cited, has been set aside for the adult's dinner. You have the water. The beef has recovered faster than you have. This is where the arithmetic of Victorian recovery medicine becomes slightly uncomfortable. You are unwell. You are being given, in place of solid food, a series of warm liquids. Toast water, beef tea, arrowroot thinned past the point of commitment, on the working theory that a digestive system under stress requires relief from the burden of actual eating. What it receives instead is beef tea at 2-hour intervals and the expectation of visible improvement. If you improve, the beef tea worked. If you do not improve, more beef tea is required. The cup is quite small. There is always more. Meanwhile, the beef tea is served with a kind of ritual gravity that suggests it is doing considerably more than it is. The tray is arranged. The napkin is folded. Someone may have brought a small flower from the garden and placed it beside the cup in a gesture of care that is genuinely touching and completely beside the point medically. You are propped against your horsehair pillow. The camphor smell drifts quietly from the linen. The arsenic curtains shift slightly at the window. You drink your beef tea. It is warm. It is undeniably beef adjacent. You finish it and set the cup back on the tray, and the adult who brought it looks at the empty cup with the focused satisfaction of someone who has administered treatment and expects results. You do not say that it tasted like the bottom of a soup pot that has given up. You say nothing. You are unwell. And you are also not a fool. You are being photographed today, or more precisely, you are being prepared to be photographed, which takes considerably longer than the photograph itself. Your hair has been wetted, combed, and arranged into an expression of domestic order that does not accurately reflect the morning. You are in your formal clothes. Your father has specified the required facial expression, something between pleasant and dignified, with no visible teeth, and you have been practicing it in the hallway mirror for the last several minutes. When the photographer lifts his cloth, you will need to hold perfectly still for somewhere between 8 and 30 seconds. The range is because no one is entirely sure. Let's talk about the photograph itself. Victorian photography requires long exposure times, which means that any movement, any fidget, any blink, any involuntary acknowledgement that you are a child with a body produces a blur. A blurred child is a failed child, photographically speaking. Your mother understands this. Your nanny understands this. The photographer, a man with an impressive amount of equipment and a moustache that implies formal credentials, understands this. You are the last to fully understand this, which is why you have been briefed twice in the last hour. Now, the chair. You are not sitting in a regular chair. You are sitting in the formal chair, which has been repositioned 3 times this morning to find what the photographer calls the light and what your father calls the correct impression. Your younger sibling has been placed beside you on a footstool, also in formal clothes, also arranged, also briefed. The baby is in your mother's lap. The baby has not been briefed. This is a structural problem that everyone is choosing to manage through optimism. Of course, there is a headrest. The photographer has brought a metal brace, a thin iron stand with a curved cradle designed to support your head from behind without appearing in the photograph. Its entire purpose is to keep you still, which is the same purpose as the clothes, the chair, the look your nanny is giving you from behind the camera, and the quiet promise of consequences. The brace does not touch you exactly, it suggests. This is where posture becomes a moral position. You are not simply sitting. You are demonstrating that your family is composed, orderly, and properly raised. Your back is straight. Your hands are folded. Your expression is the one you practiced. Somewhere behind the black cloth, the photographer is making decisions. You are holding very still. The baby is beginning to form an opinion about this arrangement. Meanwhile, the rest of the household has quietly reorganized itself around this event. The parlour has been tidied. The portrait of your grandfather has been straightened on the wall. The photographer's assistant keeps adjusting a reflective panel near the window, bouncing light in a way that makes the room feel slightly theatrical. Your best collar is starched to the point of structural integrity. It does not move when you breathe. You are not sure it allows for much breathing. And yet, when the photograph is developed, days later, sometimes weeks, what you see is a tableau of perfect Victorian stillness. You are unblurred. Your sibling is unblurred. Your mother looks composed. Your father looks like a man who has decided something important. The baby, against all statistical probability, is also still. Someone will write a date on the back in careful ink. Someone else will paste it into an album with a caption like Summer 1887 or The Children Well. The headrest will not appear in the photograph. Neither will the nanny's expression. Neither will the morning. Bedtime is not an event. It is a procedure. It begins at a fixed hour and contains fixed steps that do not vary based on how the day went or how you feel about any of them. There is washing in a basin of water that starts warm and is not refreshed. There is the changing of clothes into nightwear. There is kneeling beside the bed for prayers, which are to be spoken clearly and at a volume nanny can confirm from across the room without moving closer. Then you are horizontal under the covers at the specified hour, and the day is officially concluded. Lateness is not an available outcome. Let's talk about the washing. The basin sits on a wooden stand in the corner of the nursery. It was filled earlier. The water has had time to think about what it is. You wash your face, your hands, your neck, in that order, using a flannel that has also washed your older sibling's face and hands and neck, because the flannel does not get replaced every night. The flannel has opinions about this arrangement. They are not positive. Now the nightwear. Victorian children's nightclothes are full-length, long-sleeved, and fastened at the collar, with buttons that require a specific manoeuvre to close. This is intentional. A child who cannot quickly remove their own nightgown is, in the Victorian parenting framework, a child who is not going to go anywhere at 3 a.m. The logic is airtight. The collar is also somewhat airtight. The mattress beneath you is stuffed with horsehair and feathers, which sounds pleasant and is instead lumpy in a very specific way that you have memorized. The pillow smells of lavender and camphor, which Nanny describes as soothing, and which you have come to associate exclusively with the threat of sleep. The arsenic-dyed curtains hang at the window, their cords tapping against the sill in whatever faint breeze makes it through the glass. The family cat refuses to enter this room. You have noticed this. You have not been given a satisfying explanation. Of course there are prayers. You kneel on the wooden floor beside the bed, not the rug, the floor, and recite the approved verses at an approved volume. Nanny does not move closer. Nanny listens from her chair near the door with the particular stillness of someone who has done this 6,000 times and will notice if you skip a line. You do not skip a line. You have tried skipping a line. The pause that followed was worse than any cane. And yet, somehow, the most unsettling part of the bedtime sequence is the candle. One candle is left burning on the shelf across the room. It is not close enough to be comforting. It is close enough to cast shadows. The porcelain dolls arranged on the cabinet catch the light at an angle that their manufacturer almost certainly did not intend. Their glace eyes do not close. Yours are supposed to. Meanwhile, behind the walls, somewhere in the horsehair and plaster, something settles. Old houses do this. Victorian children learn early that houses make sounds at night, and that asking about the sounds is not a conversation Nanny will entertain after 8 o'clock. You file this under things you will think about tomorrow, which is the same place you filed it yesterday. The candle burns down. The curtain cords tap. The horsehair mattress redistributes itself under your weight. Somewhere in the house, a clock marks the quarter hour, then the half, then the hour itself, as if confirming that time is still functioning correctly and does not require your input. You were asleep before the hour. You are fairly certain you were asleep before the hour. Nanny's chair scrapes once against the floor, and then there is nothing. You are in bed. The process of getting here is complete, and what remains is the sleeping, which is expected to begin immediately and will be confirmed. The mattress beneath you is stuffed with horsehair and feathers, a combination that provides consistent support in the way that a densely packed travel trunk provides consistent support. The pillow smells of lavender and camphor. The lavender because someone considered it pleasant. The camphor to address something in the materials that the lavender alone was not sufficient to manage. You close your eyes. Somewhere near the window, the curtain cords shift faintly in the draught from under the sill. Now. The curtains are green. They have been green since before you were born, and they will be green long after you have grown and left and possibly moved to another country to recover. The dye that makes them that particular shade of green, a colour that sits somewhere between sage and achievement, contains arsenic. This is not a secret exactly. It is more of a detail nobody has found the right moment to raise. The curtain cords tap gently against the window frame. You listen to them. Let's talk about the mattress again, because it deserves a second mention. The horsehair component does not compress. This is considered a virtue. Proper support of the developing spine was a Victorian priority, in the same way that an oak workbench supports your spine if you lie on it with enough conviction. The feathers fill in the gaps the horsehair cannot manage, and then migrate slowly toward one end over the course of the night, so that by morning you are effectively sleeping on a flat wooden surface with a decorative feather situation at your feet. Nobody adjusts the mattress. Adjustment implies complaint. This is where the smell becomes its own thing entirely. The camphor sits at the back of your nose in a way that is not unpleasant, but is definitely present. It was added to the pillowcase by someone who understood that certain materials, over time, develop a character of their own. The lavender was layered on top of that character to make it a more sociable one. The combination is what a Victorian apothecary would describe as restorative. You would describe it as a thing that is happening to your face. You breathe through it. The curtains shift again. Meanwhile, the rocking horse in the corner does not move. It has one eye and 3 legs, and has been standing in that particular corner for longer than you have been alive. In the dark, it is a silhouette. The silhouette has opinions. You are not sure what they are, but you are confident they are not warm ones. The porcelain dolls on the shelf above the toy cabinet are also present, as they have been all day, their glass eyes catching the last of the candle's light. The candle is burning near them because someone put it there, and because in the 1880s proximity of open flame to porcelain and horsehair and arsenic curtains was considered the least of the available concerns. Of course, you are tired. The day was long in the specific way Victorian days were long, not because more things happened, but because fewer of them were optional. Lessons, posture, toast water, the nature walk during which you identified 4 species of grass by their Latin names and were not permitted to sit down, supper, prayers, the communal flannel, all of it completed in the correct order, at the correct pace, under appropriate supervision. You are 7 years old, and you have a schedule that would exhaust a minor government official. You shift slightly on the horsehair. It does not shift back. The camphor settles. The curtain cords tap once more against the glass, and then stop. The dolls maintain their position. The rocking horse stands exactly where it has always stood. And somewhere down the corridor, Nanny's footsteps pause outside the door, just long enough to confirm that you are where you are supposed to be, and then continue on. You have developed, with your siblings, an informal system. It was never formally agreed upon. There was no meeting. It exists entirely in the vocabulary of glances, the calibrated timing of a well-placed cough, and the specific knowledge of which floorboard produces a sound, and which side of it to step on. One sibling covers for another at the afternoon recitation. One of you knows exactly how long Nanny takes on her kitchen errand, and times activities accordingly. You trade information, schedules, moods, the current location of the wooden spoon, with the careful economic awareness of people who understand its value and what they are owed in return. Let's talk about the recitation cover. The afternoon lesson requires each child to stand, deliver a passage of scripture or verse from memory, and sit back down without incident. Incident, in this context, means forgetting a line, mispronouncing a word, or showing any visible sign that this is not how you wish to spend a Tuesday. Your older sibling has memorized not only their own passage, but a convincing approximation of yours, delivered at sufficient volume during the moment you lose your place. Nanny is writing in her ledger. She does not notice. This is the system working exactly as intended. Now, the intelligence operation regarding the wooden spoon. Its location is not fixed. This is the first thing you learn. It migrates, kitchen drawer, apron pocket, the surface of the sideboard during high alert periods, and tracking it requires a rotating surveillance effort across multiple children of different heights and sight lines. Your youngest sibling's contribution is limited but specific. They are at precisely the right elevation to see beneath the kitchen table without appearing to look. They have never once been asked what they observed down there. Nobody has ever thanked them. They continue anyway, because the system requires it. Of course, the system has its own internal economy. Information about Nanny's mood before breakfast is worth more than information about her mood after lunch, because the morning sets the operational conditions for the entire day. A small piece of bread crust, saved from the morning's toast water and offered at the right moment, functions as currency. Nobody calls it currency. It is just bread. The transaction is never acknowledged out loud, because acknowledging it would require explaining it, and explaining it would mean admitting it exists, which would mean Nanny would dismantle it by Friday. Meanwhile, the teething baby is both the system's greatest liability and its most reliable asset. When the baby cries, all other activity pauses. Nanny moves toward the baby. The older children move in the opposite direction. This is not cruelty. This is logistics. The baby has been conscripted into the operation without its knowledge or consent, which is, to be fair, standard practice for everyone under 5 in this household. And yet the system has its failures. Someone coughs at the wrong moment. Someone steps on the announcing floorboard from the wrong side, which produces a sound of considerable opinion. Someone trades schedule information that turns out to be 20 minutes out of date, and an entire afternoon plan collapses quietly into its own wreckage. There is no debrief. There is no inquiry. There is only the mutual understanding that next time someone will need to verify the kitchen errand timing more carefully. The porcelain dolls in the locked cabinet watch all of this. They have watched it for years. They have never said anything, largely because they are dolls, but also because they appear to have made a decision about whose side they are on, and it is not yours. You need to get up. This is a simple biological situation with a significant practical complication. The nursery floor. At night. Between your bed and the door lie alphabet blocks, marbles, a wooden skittle that has been migrating toward the centre of the room since morning, the remains of a bread crust from at least Thursday, and in the far corner the rocking horse, which is stationary, but which, in complete darkness, presents a silhouette that invites a moment of confirmation. You navigate all of this in bare feet and total silence, because waking Nanny is a consequence that ranks above most of what you might step on. Nanny sleeps in a small room off the nursery. The door is not fully closed. It is never fully closed. This is not an accident. The gap is approximately 4 inches, which is exactly enough to hear a marble shift against a floorboard, a skittle knocked sideways, or the specific creak that lives in the third plank from the left and has never, in living memory, been quiet about it. You know about the third plank. You have known about it for 2 years. You go around it the same way experienced travellers go around a customs official who has your description. Now the actual journey. You lower yourself from the bed 1 limb at a time in the manner of someone disembarking a raft. The horsehair mattress offers a faint protest, a compressed sigh, essentially, but holds. Your feet find the floor. Shh, 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 shh. The floor is cold. The cold is not the problem. The problem is that your feet, being bare, have no intelligence about what is directly ahead of them, and the alphabet blocks are not distributed in any logical order. You will find a B before you find an A. You always find the B first. The B is the dangerous one. Let's talk about the marble situation. Muken ukers aberosidebot. Marbles in complete darkness are a category of hazard that Victorian household management literature does not adequately address, possibly because the people writing Victorian household management literature were not travelling barefoot across nursery floors at 2 a.m. One marble underfoot in dim light is a comedy. One marble underfoot in total darkness is a structural event. You have learned to slide rather than step, which is slower, but which allows your foot to push obstacles gently aside rather than commit to them. This is, effectively, the same technique used to walk on ice. You are 8. Of course, the rocking horse has to be confirmed. You know it is stationary. You know this because you can hear nothing, and the rocking horse in motion has a particular rhythm, a low, rhythmic groan from the left rear joint. That would be audible. And yet, it is in the shape of a large animal in a dark corner, and there is a moment every single time when you stop and look at it until it becomes furniture again. The rocking horse does not move. The rocking horse simply waits to be looked at. It has apparently done this since before your eldest sibling was born. Meanwhile, behind the 4-inch gap in Nanny's door, everything is still. This is not the same as safe. Nanny has a highly developed sensitivity to specific sounds, specifically yours, at specific hours. She can sleep through the baby's intermittent complaints, through the distant sound of a hansom cab, through your older sibling turning pages in the dark. She cannot sleep through the B block. Nobody knows why it's always the B block. You reach the door. The handle is cold brass and requires a particular grip. Firm but not sudden, and the hinge has an opinion about being moved quickly. You have negotiated this before. The door opens. The hallway is marginally less dark, which is the best thing that can be said about it. Behind you, the nursery sits in its usual arrangement. Blocks, marbles, rocking horse, bread crust, 3 sleeping siblings, and a set of porcelain dolls in the locked cabinet who have, as always, witnessed everything and said nothing. You have made it through the cod liver oil, the window cage, the soothing syrup, the green wallpaper, the punishment chair, and the toast water. You have attended lessons in correct posture while sitting near arsenic-dyed curtains. You have eaten arrowroot for breakfast and breathed the coal, thick air of a city that was technically doing its best. You are older now. Your posture is genuinely excellent. There is a part of you that will never fully trust a bottle with a reassuring label. But you are here, and that, given the full weight of the evidence, is not a small thing. Let's talk about what you carry, not the lessons, not the Latin plant names, not the 14-stanza poem about a brook that you can still recite in its entirety, despite having no memory of learning it. You carry the specific posture of someone who was told, repeatedly, that slouching was a moral failure. You carry a faint wariness around curtains in rooms painted green. You carry the knowledge, somewhere low in your body, of exactly which floorboard to avoid and at what hour. These are not skills anyone teaches. They accumulate. Now the children around you are doing the same arithmetic. The ones who made it through their own window cages, their own patent syrups, their own punishment chairs positioned beneath their own stern family portraits. Nobody talks about it directly. You simply recognize each other, the way people do when they've survived the same institution, which functionally is what the Victorian nursery was. One child in your acquaintance still flinches at the smell of camphor. Another has not voluntarily eaten tapioca since 1883 and is not prepared to explain why. You understand completely. Of course, the adults around you are proud. Your parents look at you and see evidence that their methods worked. The early bedtimes, the cod liver oil, the nature walks where you memorized the Latin name for every plant you were forbidden from touching. They are not wrong that you turned out reasonably well. They are also not aware of what you actually remember from those years. These are not incompatible facts. You let them stand together without comment. Meanwhile, the nursery is still there, smaller than you remember, obviously. The rocking horse is still in the corner, one-eyed and three-legged, still wearing the expression of something that has seen too much and forgiven nothing. The porcelain dolls are still on the shelf behind the locked glass, cheeks still flushed, eyes still tracking the room in that way they have. The wallpaper is still green. You do not stand in the room for very long. And yet here is the thing about surviving a childhood like this one. It does not make you remarkable. It makes you Victorian. Everyone around you has the same posture, the same latent cod liver oil associations, the same unspoken familiarity with remedies that should not have been applied to a child. You did not endure anything unusual. You endured exactly what was usual, which is its own kind of observation. The B block on the nursery floor remains the most dangerous object in the house. Nobody moves it. You spent the night ingesting arrowroot, refusing beef tea, and being supervised by a wire cage that was, medically speaking, a completely reasonable idea at the time. You navigated the locked toy cabinet, the camphor pillows, the oilcloth, the wallpaper that was quietly trying to poison you, and the cod liver oil administered with the gravity of a legal proceeding. The porcelain dolls stared at the ceiling the whole time. They had opinions. They kept them to themselves. These were people doing their absolute best with a medical establishment that endorsed cage ventilation and sold opium syrup with a straight face. That's not nothing. It's just also a lot to hand a small child. You got hot water and a blanket tonight. No pigeon. No camphor. Nothing watching you sleep with glass eyes. Settle a little deeper into wherever you are. Let the wallpaper, arsenic-free, as far as you know, hold the room. Sleep well.
sleepy scrolls.